Hello! Today's lesson, I'm going to show you how to create a flowchart. In the previous lesson, I showed you how to create a Google account, and I showed you how to create a gratis and immutable actions analysis. We're going to use all three of those pieces of information to do the flowchart today. So with that being said, the first thing you're going to do is go to google.com and make sure that you're logged into your account. In this case, I'm logged into my remyfullsail@gmail.com. From here, you're going to go to your web browser on the top and go to a website called draw.io. Some of you may have this page load very slowly. If that happens, that's because you're on Internet Explorer. I would recommend that you use Firefox or Google Chrome. Alright, so the reason why we're logged into our Google account is because it automatically will save our flowcharts to our Google Drive. So in this case, we're going to create a new diagram. And we're going to call this one Go Fish. And we're going to create. And then here it will ask for a folder. Ignore my many different folders. I'll just put it for now. Example document. Select. Okay, so this is Draw.io. And what's really nice about this is that not only does it save your flowcharts to the cloud, it has version control on here. But I'll get to that in a minute. For now, we are going to go over how to create a flowchart. So, you may have seen this image in one of my lectures if you're on campus, or if you're online, you might have seen this posted in one of the assignments. But I'm going to kind of go over this. These are the four main shapes you're going to be using for creating your own flowcharts. Now, a rectangle is a process, and this means it is something that would, for example, start or end a game. Or I'm sorry, it would be a system in a game. So for example, like shuffling cards, or maybe figuring out who the start player would be. It's a process that would have an output. A conditional is exactly what it sounds like. It's something that the player has to work with. So, for example, maybe the player has 5 of the same cards. You know, what if you have 5 of the same cards, what happens? What do they do? So on and so on. A decision is what a player decides to do. So, an example, if a player has 4 of the same, what happens then? Well, they can decide to score a point. That could be something they can do. Again, just talking theoreticals. And then a go-to is a 0 or 1. So, for example, starting a game or ending a game, or a transition of some sort. So let's take these and put them into practice. This makes more sense when you see it versus me explaining it. So, as we did in a previous lesson, we created our gratis and our meaningful actions analysis, which has the rules of our game. So the great thing about doing the gratis first is that you have a template to work from before doing your flowchart. A flowchart is a visual roadmap that will help you for a turn order or for a phase of a game. So in this case, let's go ahead and just draw a circle. Okay, so you may notice these blue little dots in the corners. If you click and hold and just drag around, it'll resize that to any size you want. And you may be thinking, well, okay, well, how do I resize a document? This looks pretty small. Well, really cool thing about Draw.io, you can just drag this into any of the gray space and it'll resize the document for you. So, for now, we're just going to put that circle there. And we'll resize this to be a little bit smaller. So, how do we write text in here? Pretty straightforward. Double click it. And then your little right reticle will appear right there. And from there, you can go ahead and type in whatever you want. In this case, we'll do start game. So I have a couple of pro tips here that I would recommend for you. You may have noticed when I did this that on the right side, the text menu popped up. Now, you could change the size of your text. And let's kind of just do that real quick. We'll do 19. Remember, it's just like Word, so if you select it and go up, we'll do size 17 font. We'll also make it bold. And this is a big one that I want to point out. Make sure you have center formatting. And you may ask, well, what's the big deal about that? Well, I'll show you. Let's say we have some more detailed rules. Like, for example, Start game, the player with the most colorful clothing goes first. Now, as you can see, with center formatting, everything stays relatively in my word bubble, but I still have to resize it just a little bit so it matches better, so it doesn't go outside of the word bubble. But look what happens if it was just set to left formatting like normal. As you can see, it kind of doesn't really look too good. So a little pro tip I always say is to do center formatting, and then if words are going outside the bubble, just hit enter. Just make sure that it all stays within there. It's much easier to do it this way. But for now, we don't need this information. We just need start game. I just wanted to point that out before we continued. So, we are creating Go Fish. So, as you saw, I put a title up here of Go Fish. And we have our start game. But now we need a system to start the game. So, again, we need a process. So, the first process of a Go Fish would be nominate a dealer. So let's go ahead and do that, and let's double click and do nominate a dealer. And we'll make that font size a little bit bigger and make it bold. Alright, cool. But now we have to connect these two shapes together. So how do you do that? Very straightforward. Click the shape that you want to drag off from. Remember, what you actually drag off from is important. In this case, we want to do it from start game. Now, while it's selected, you see these dark blue dots, but you may notice these little light kind of triangles all on the corners. If you click one of those and hold it, it creates a line. And from there, you can connect this to any shape that you want that's on your flowchart. In this case, we're going to drag to nominate a dealer. Now, if I click this box with nominate a dealer and move it, well, now it follows no matter where I place it, because I've connected those two shapes together. I could click on the individual arrows and move the little dots around in any way I want if I want to go ahead and clean things up later. Or I could just hit delete. So, here's something I want to point out though, that I've seen happen pretty often, and I have people ask me, how come this happened? Let's say you didn't put this shape first, and you just dragged off a line. And then you decide later, I'm going to put a rectangle right here. And then I'm going to type in info in here. And then I'm going to move it. And you're like, oh, wait, why is the line not following this? Well, as you may have noticed, when you drag a line off from a shape, it needs to connect to something. If not, it's just hanging out, floating in outer space with nothing connected to it. So, again, if you drag off and you make sure that the little blue bubble appears around your shape, now it's connected. It's parented to this object. So there we go. Now we have nominate a dealer. So let's continue the flowchart. Let's go into the next process, which we're going to drag another process out. And we'll rescale it a little bit. And we're going to call this one Shuffle Cards, because that would be the next thing that you would do. You would shuffle the cards from the game after you have a dealer that's been decided. And you'll drag to that shape. Now you may notice that my lines are red and yours may be black. I didn't go over this, but if you click on the line, you may notice here on the right hand side, styles. Here you can change the size of your lines to be super skinny or super fat. I like to have chunky lines so I can really see what I'm doing. You can set them to be round lines, curved, or whatever. This is all just visual flair. I recommend just keeping it simple. I just have my lines red because it's very clear what the next step is. But by default, you'll have it be black. I would recommend try not to play with the colors too much. Keep everything consistent. The more it's consistent, the easier it is for somebody to read your flowchart. Specifically me, because I'm grading your papers. So, after shuffle cards, we have another process. We are going to draw out another rectangle. Again, there's a lot of early processes for this game. With this one, we are going to have deal 5 cards to every player. And we're going to drag off there. Oops. Boop. And let's change that back to the color red, because that's nice and striking. Okay, and if we double click in here, we can make that bold. Alright, so now we have our early processes. Let's start actually getting into the game a little bit further. So, start game, nominate a dealer, shuffle cards, deal 5 cards to every player. So, we have another process that would come after this. This process is the start turn. So let's just do start turn. And we'll make this a little bit bigger. Boom, 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 boom. All right, so let's go from the start turn. How do you start the game of Go Fish? Well, if we go back to our little chart right here, we start off with decision. That's how every round starts. It's a player decision or a parallelogram. Oof, cannot say that today. You would draw one of these guys right here. And you would ask another player for a card. And this is the conditional, or I'm sorry, the decision that you're making as a player. You're asking our player for a card that you need for your hand. So let's drag that off to that. All right, so from there, now this leads into our next kind of statement, which is going to be a conditional. So let's drag a little diamond in here. And you may notice that if you try free dragging it, it does odd shapes like this. But if you hold the shift key, it will keep it constrained to the shape. So it will not draw in odd dimensions. It'll draw exactly the same dimension every time. All right. And we're going to double click this guy. Does the player have that card? So player has card, question mark. And let's make that big and all right, and drag off that. So let's kind of go through this again. We have our start game, we nominate a dealer, we shuffle the cards, we deal 5 cards to every player, and then we start turn. And then a player asks another player for a card of their choice. Again, that is a player decision. And from there, I'm sorry, it's getting my terminology mixed up today. It is a decision the player makes. And then it's a conditional of the player having the card or not. From there, we go into our next step. Does the player have the card? Yes or no? So, let's go ahead and set up our information first. Let's just say down here represents no. Well, if it's no, it's Go Fish. And again, this is using a rectangle because it's representing a process. The process is Go Fish. So we're dragging off to here. But we want this to be known for when the player says no. So how can we do that? Well, if we double click in here, we can add text inside of our lines. If we double click. In this case, we're typing no. And we're going to make it big and bold. Really big so we can see it. There we go. So no, Go Fish. All right. So we have our no condition. And again, if we drag this around, the line will follow. So let's move that down there. And let's go ahead and create another rectangle because it's another process. Okay. Now from here, we're going to drag off, and we're going to say this is the yes condition. If they do have that card, what happens? Well, the player receives the card. Receive card. And spell check. And we'll make this big, and we'll bold it. Okay. So, just like before, we double click our line, and we can now add text. And this time we're going to add yes. And we'll select it, we'll make it bold, and we'll make it big. Okay, so now the player receives a card. So, what happens here? We have the yes-no conditional. If the player does not have the card, then the current player is told Go Fish. And then from there, what happens? But also the same end of the coin. If the player that was asked does have the card, then the player that has asked will receive a card from that anointed player. What happens in this regard? Well, let's go ahead and kind of start combining things together. We're going to draw another diamond, and we're going to put it right here. And we'll do this nice and big. And has 4 of the same question mark. So remember, for Go Fish, you need 4 of the same cards in order to score a point or score a book. So player receives card. Let's drag down to has 4 of the same. And we'll make that a little bit bigger. Okay. So it has 4 of the same. Now from there, well, we have a conditional. Does that player really have 4 of the same? If they do, we'll say yes. And we'll drag that off to the right. So let's go ahead and create a system for when you have 4 of the same. You score a book. In this case, a book is a point in Go Fish. And we'll make that nice and big. And we'll resize that real quick. And we'll drag off this. And this is the yes condition. So just like before, we need to make sure that the player knows that in this flowchart that this is a yes or no. So we'll double click in here and we'll type in yes. Okay, so has 4 of the same yes, score a book. But then what happens if we have no? Well, we are going to get to that in a second. What I want to do is set up what happens from the Go Fish step. And this will make sense in a second. So let's go ahead and have that next step set up. We'll draw another diamond over here. Are all cards drawn? Question mark. And we'll make that nice and big, and we'll draw that right here. So Go Fish. Remember, we're going fish. That means that you are taking a card from the center of the table. So what happens if you grab a card from the center table? All cards are drawn. Let's just say, yes, they are all drawn. All the cards from the middle of the table are gone. What happens? Well, now we'll put another circle here because that's an end game condition. And again, if we look back at our circles, that's a go-to. That means it's a 0 or 1, or it is a start or an end. In this case, this is the end game. So let's just say that drawing down to here represents yes. Okay. All right, so all cards are drawn. Yes? Well, the game ends. Well, what happens if no? That's a very straightforward answer. One more system would play out. And from here, this would be the next player turn. And we would drag off from this because this is no. All cards are not drawn. And we'll double click here and type in no. No soup for you. And we'll drag this off because this goes back to the start turn again because the next player starts. And then they will go through this whole process once more. So, let's review really quick. You may have noticed that there's one part still kind of left here. Now, from scoring a book, well, that's good. You've scored a point, but what happens? You notice that right here, we're kind of in a statement where nothing would happen with a player. They score a point. What do they do next? Where do they go? Everything should always loop back to some sort of action or something in relation to your game. Nothing truly ends unless if it's a go-to, where it's a start or an end of something. So, from this system of scoring a book or a point, what happens? Well, if you look at it, technically, you have to make sure if all the cards are drawn or if there's still cards remaining in the game. You drag off, and instead of connecting to the line that you want to combine, you drag to the shape, and it'll combine all lines that connect to the same point. if you drag there. So now score a book has been combined together to draw all cards drawn. So let's review. Has 4 of the same? Yes. Score a book. All cards drawn? Yes, no. If yes, the game ends. However, we still don't have has 4 of the same. What happens if they don't have 4 of the same? Well, that's very straightforward. Let's go ahead and kind of wrap this up. We're going to take this and we're going to bring this back to our all cards drawn. Now you may notice this looks really gross because it's overlapping lines. But that's the nice thing about this. These little blue dots, you can click and drag them and rearrange them to look way more clean. So, you know what? I'm going to make this look a little bit nicer. I'm going to move it right here. And move this right here. Never mind. That looked better. Alright, so let's go ahead and put this as a no condition. We're double clicking that, and this is going to be no. And we'll make this nice and big. And there you go. We now have our completed flowchart. So if you hold Control and middle mouse zoom, while mouse wheeling up and down, this is how I can kind of zoom in and out and see everything. So here's the full flowchart, and let's kind of break this down further. So, if the player starts the game, we're going to go from the very beginning. Start game, we're going to nominate a dealer. We're going to shuffle cards. And we'll make that a little bit bigger so it's easier to read from a distance. And then we'll deal 5 cards to every player. After that, we'll start the turn. Then asking our player for a card. Does the player have the card? Yes or no? If yes, you receive that card. Do you have 4 of the same type of card? If yes, you score a book. If no, are all cards drawn? Then yes, no. You go into the next step. If it's no, that's the next player's turn. Then from there, you start a new turn. Asking our player for a card. Player has a card. Yes, no. If it's no, then they go fish. And they would then go draw a card. And are all cards drawn? And again, yes or no. If it's yes, then the game ends. This is a full and completed flowchart. So, now, you need to save this out as an image. This is where I've seen a lot of confusion happen. I'm going to show you how to do just that. You're going to go to File, and most people will see a Save As option. If you're hooked up to Google Drive, it automatically saves, so don't worry. But what you want to do is go to Export As. And you either want to export as a PNG or a JPEG. One of these 2 types of files. In this case, I'm going to click PNG. There's some settings here. You can have a transparent background, selection only, blah, blah, blah. I just suggest you leave it alone and just hit export. Now from here, it's going to ask you if you want to save this anywhere. You can save this or download it. In this case, I'm going to just click download. If I now click go fish, and my downloads right here, here is my flowchart, completely set up and ready to go. So that is how you create a flowchart. In the next lesson, I'm going to show you how to put this all together. And thank you and take care.